What happens when one engineer decides to stand up against a toxic corporate system that destroys careers? This is the story of Jake Williams, how a single act of courage became a movement that transformed Silicon Valley. For Jake Williams sat at his desk in the bustling tech company, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Silicon Valley office, casting a warm glow on his workspace. As one of the company's top software engineers, Jake took pride in his consistent record of excellence. A shadow fell across his screen. Without turning, he knew it was Martha Sanders, the project director. Her presence always brought a chill to the air around his desk. He could feel her eyes scrutinizing his work, looking for any minor flaw to criticize. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice sharp and cold, "I expect a full report on the system update by this afternoon." "Of course, Mrs. Sanders. I've already completed the initial testing phase." She made a small noise of disapproval and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Jake watched her retreat to her glass-walled office, where she continued to observe him from a distance. Around him, other engineers kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. The tension in the air was familiar. It happened every time Sanders approached his desk. Despite his impressive track record and positive feedback from clients, she seemed determined to find fault with everything he did. His phone lit up with a message from Mike, a friendly colleague. "Great work on the update. Don't mind her." Jake nodded slightly, but didn't reply. He turned back to his screen, focusing on the code before him. Years of experience had taught him to let his work speak for itself. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how well he performed, Sanders would always view him differently from his colleagues. The morning continued, and Jake buried himself in his work, trying to ignore the weight of Sanders' constant surveillance from her office. He had earned his place here, and he wasn't going to let anyone make him doubt that, not even Martha Sanders. The conference room felt unusually tense that morning. Jake sat with his team, watching as Martha Sanders paced at the front of the room. Her heels tapped a sharp rhythm against the floor as she flipped through the project report, her face growing darker with each page. "This is completely unacceptable," she said, placing the report down with calculated precision. "How did such a basic error make it into the final build?" The room fell silent. Jake glanced at his colleagues, seeing the same discomfort reflected in their faces. The error she referred to was minor, a small UI glitch that had been fixed within minutes of discovery. "Mrs. Sanders," Jake spoke up, his voice calm and professional. "The issue was identified during routine testing and corrected immediately. It never reached our users." She turned to him, her blue eyes cold. "Mr. Williams, perhaps in your experience, such oversights are acceptable. But in this company..." "With respect," Jake continued, "our team has maintained a 99.9 accuracy rate over the past year. This single incident..." "I don't recall asking for your opinion," Sanders cut in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you spend as much time checking your work as you do defending it, we might not be having this conversation." Several team members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Jake felt the sting of her words but kept his expression neutral. He'd faced this kind of treatment before. "Now," Sanders continued, scanning the room, "I expect every line of code to be reviewed again. All of it. I want reports on my desk by tomorrow morning." The team exchanged worried glances. Tomorrow morning meant another late night at the office. A completely unnecessary one, Jake thought, but he knew better than to speak up again. "Is that clear?" Sanders asked, her gaze lingering on Jake. "Yes, Mrs. Sanders," the team mumbled in unison. As they filed out of the conference room, Jake's colleague Lisa whispered, "That was unfair. You were right to speak up." Jake just nodded, his jaw tight. Through the glass walls, he could see Sanders watching them, a satisfied expression on her face. He knew this wasn't about the code error. It never was. This was about power, about showing who was in control. Back at his desk, Jake opened the project files, preparing for the long night ahead. Around him, his teammates did the same, the office atmosphere heavy with unspoken frustration. The office felt colder after the meeting. Jake walked past rows of desks, noticing how his colleagues kept their eyes fixed on their screens. Some typed with unnecessary intensity, Others pretended to be deep in conversation. No one looked his way. At his desk, Jake's computer chimed with a new email notification. His stomach tightened as he saw the sender, Martha Sanders. The message was brief but clear. "Mr. Williams, your team's report will be required by 5 p.m. today, not tomorrow morning as previously stated. I trust this won't be an issue given your confidence in the project's quality. M. Sanders." Jake checked the time, 2:30 p.m. The task would normally take a full day. He looked around, hoping to catch someone's eye to share this impossible demand, but his teammates remained focused on their screens, their shoulders tense. Lisa, who had supported him earlier, now sat with her back turned. Even Tom, usually the first to offer help, seemed absorbed in his work. The message was clear. They couldn't risk being associated with him. Jake opened the project files and began working. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, but his mind kept returning to the isolated feeling growing in his chest. The occasional whispers and glances from other teams made it worse. A chat message popped up from Mike. "Sorry, man, we all know it's not right." Before Jake could respond, he saw Mike quickly close the chat window. Through the glass walls, Sanders walked past, her eyes scanning the office like a hawk searching for prey. Jake straightened in his chair and focused on his screen. The code blurred slightly as fatigue set in, but he kept working. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk as the hours passed. One by one, his colleagues began their usual preparations to leave for the day. Each passing figure seemed to avoid looking his way. At 4:45 p.m., Jake finished the report. His back ached from sitting hunched over for hours, but he'd done it. As he hit send, he noticed he was one of the last people left in the office. Only the cleaning staff and a few other engineers remained, their faces illuminated by their screens in the dimming light. The deadline had been met, but the victory felt hollow. In the quiet of the nearly empty office, Jake felt the weight of his isolation more than ever. As Jake prepared to leave the office, Mike caught up with him at the elevator. The older engineer waited until they were alone before speaking. "Hey, you holding up okay?" Mike's voice was low and concerned. That deadline today was completely unreasonable. Jake managed a tired smile. "I'm fine. Just another day, right?" "Listen," Mike said, leaning against the wall. "I've been here 15 years. I've seen how Sanders operates. She's doing to you what she's done to others, pushing until they break." The elevator arrived empty. They stepped inside, and Jake pressed the parking level button. "You notice how she only picks certain people?" Mike continued. "Last year it was Anita from the testing team. Before that, David from development. Both excellent at their jobs, both gone now." Jake nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. He'd heard about those departures but hadn't connected the dots until now. "The thing is, Jake, you're better than most. Your code is solid. Your projects always deliver. That's what bothers her. She can't stand someone like you succeeding." The elevator stopped, and they walked toward the parking lot. The evening air felt cool against Jake's face. "Just keep your head down," Mike advised. "Document everything, every email, every request, every unreasonable deadline. Trust me on this." Jake stopped by his car, keys in hand. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone should have warned the others." Mike's expression was serious, "and because you're too good at what you do to let her win." As Mike walked away, Jake sat in his car thinking. All the late-night demands, the constant criticism, the impossible deadlines, it wasn't random. Sanders was systematically trying to push him out, just like she'd done to others before him. He started his car, determination replacing exhaustion. If Sanders wanted him gone, she'd have to try harder. He wasn't going to make it easy for her. The break room hummed with quiet conversation as Jake warmed up his lunch. He sat alone at a corner table, but fragments of nearby discussions drifted his way. "Did you hear about the new developer Sanders forced out last week?" Someone whispered, just 3 months into the job. "Same story every time." Another voice responded, "Impossible deadlines, constant criticism, then gone." Jake pretended to focus on his phone while eating, but his ears caught every word. At the next table, 2 senior developers spoke in hushed tones. "She's doing it again with Jake. Same pattern. The voice belonged to Sarah from the testing team. "Remember what happened to David?" Before Jake could hear more, a shadow fell across his table. Sanders stood there, her tablet in hand. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. "The client needs urgent modifications to the security protocol. I need it completed by end of day." Jake glanced at his watch. It was already 1:30 p.m. The security protocol? That would normally take at least 2 days to. "Are you saying you can't handle it?" Her voice carried just enough volume to ensure others could hear. "No, Mrs. Sanders, I'll get it done." She placed a file on his table. "Good. I'll expect your report by 6 p.m. Complete documentation, of course." The break room remained silent as she left. Jake looked at the file. The requirements were extensive. This wasn't just a modification, it was practically a complete overhaul. As he gathered his half-eaten lunch to return to his desk, he caught sympathetic glances from his colleagues. But no one spoke up. No one offered to help. Back at his desk, Jake opened the security protocol files. His afternoon meetings would have to be canceled. The task before him was massive, and Sanders knew it. This wasn't about the client's needs. It was another move in her game to prove he couldn't keep up. Jake cracked his knuckles and started coding. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him fail. The office grew quiet as evening settled in. Most employees had gone home, leaving Jake alone with the soft hum of his computer. His eyes burned from staring at lines of code, but his fingers kept moving across the keyboard. The security protocol modification slowly took shape. Through the windows, city lights began twinkling in the darkness. Jake checked the time, 5:45 p.m. He'd skipped his afternoon coffee, canceled 2 team meetings, and hadn't taken a single break, but the work was nearly complete. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister asking about dinner plans. He ignored it, focusing on the final tests. Each line of code had to be perfect. He knew Sanders would scrutinize every character, looking for any excuse to criticize his work. At 5:58 p.m., Jake hit send on the email containing his report. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The office was nearly empty now, only the cleaning staff moving quietly between desks. Through the glass walls of her office, he could see Sanders still at her desk. She picked up her phone as his email arrived, a slight frown crossing her face as she read. Jake knew she had expected him to fail, to miss the deadline or make mistakes under pressure. As he packed his laptop, anger bubbled up inside him. This constant pressure, these impossible demands, it wasn't right. He thought about what Mike had said about documenting everything, about the whispered conversations in the break room. "This has to stop," he muttered to himself, closing his bag. Other talented people had left, unable or unwilling to fight back, but Jake wasn't going to be another casualty of Sanders' tactics. Walking to his car in the dark parking lot, Jake made a decision. He would find a way to confront this situation head-on. There had to be others who had faced similar treatment. There had to be evidence of her systematic discrimination. He wouldn't quit. He wouldn't let her win. Instead, he would gather proof, document everything, and find a way to expose her behavior. The question was how and who he could trust to help him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sanders' office as Jake entered. She sat behind her large desk, a manila folder placed precisely in front of her. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers tapped steadily on the desk's surface. "Take a seat, Mr. Williams," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Jake sat down, his back straight. The security protocol report he'd submitted last night lay open on her desk. "I've reviewed your recent work," Sanders began, her voice cool and measured. "And after careful consideration, I've determined that you're not a good fit for our company culture." Jake felt his chest tighten. "I don't understand. My work has consistently met or exceeded expectations. This isn't about your technical skills." She slid a document across the desk. "It's about fitting in with our team dynamic. Your presence has become disruptive." Disruptive? Jake kept his voice steady despite the anger rising in his throat. "I've delivered every project on time, even with impossible deadlines." Sanders smiled thinly. "Your termination is effective immediately. HR will email you the details of your severance package." "This isn't fair," Jake said, his hands gripping the chair's armrests. We both know this isn't about my performance. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." She was already looking at her computer screen, dismissing him. "I suggest you make this easy on yourself." Jake stood slowly, his mind racing. Through the glass walls, he could see his colleagues pretending not to watch. Everything he'd feared, everything Mike had warned him about, was happening. Sanders had won, or so she thought. "Mrs. Sanders, I need specific examples of how I failed to meet company standards," Jake said, leaning forward in his chair. His heart raced, but he kept his voice professional. She flipped open a folder, scanning it with exaggerated care. Well, there was the UI glitch in last week's update, the delayed response to client emails, your confrontational attitude in team meetings. "Those are minor issues that were all resolved immediately," Jake countered. "My overall performance ratings have been excellent. I've brought in 3 major clients this year alone." Sanders held up her hand, cutting him off. "Mr. Williams, I'm afraid you're not seeing the bigger picture. Your technical skills aren't the issue. It's your inability to adapt." "Adapt to what exactly?" Jake's voice grew firmer. "I've completed every task assigned, even the ones with impossible deadlines. My team respects my work." "This isn't a debate," Sanders said sharply, closing the folder. "The decision has been made. Your aggressive response right now only confirms it." "Aggressive? I'm simply asking for a fair explanation." "We're done here." Sanders pressed a button on her desk phone. "Security will be here shortly. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Jake sat there, stunned by the calculated coldness of it all. Every attempt to defend himself was being twisted, used as further justification for his termination. The unfairness of it burned in his chest, but he could see it was pointless to continue arguing. The security guard appeared at the door, and Jake knew this chapter was over. But as he stood up, meeting Sanders's icy stare one last time, he silently promised himself this wouldn't be the end of the story. The security guard followed Jake to his desk as he gathered his belongings. The office had fallen unnaturally quiet, keyboards suddenly silent. Through his peripheral vision, he could see colleagues ducking their heads, pretending to be absorbed in their screens. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he placed his family photo in his box. 3 years of work, of friendships, of achievements, all reduced to a few personal items. The security guard stood watching, making the moment even more humiliating. Lisa, who sat nearby, kept her eyes fixed on her monitor, though her fingers had stopped typing. Tom, who had shared countless lunch breaks with Jake, suddenly needed to make a phone call. The message was clear. No one wanted to risk being associated with him. As Jake picked up his box, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He waited until he reached the elevator to check it. It was a message from Mike. "This isn't right. We all know it. I'm sorry I couldn't speak up. Call me when you're out. Maybe there's something we can do." The elevator doors opened, and Jake stepped in. Through the closing gap, he caught a final glimpse of the office. Sanders stood at her door, watching his departure with a satisfied expression. A few colleagues glanced his way quickly, then turned back to their screens. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Lisa. "Stay strong. What she did isn't fair. Just be careful. She's watching all of us now." Jake tucked his phone away as he walked through the lobby. The morning sun felt harsh on his face as he pushed through the building's glass doors. In his box, his achievements and certifications seemed to mock him, proof of excellence that apparently wasn't enough. Jake methodically emptied his desk drawer, placing each item into the cardboard box. His awards for excellence in coding, the thank you notes from satisfied clients, the family photo that had kept him going through late nights, all went in one by one. The security guard shifted impatiently, but Jake refused to rush. As he unplugged his personal laptop, his mind was already racing with plans. Every email he'd saved, every unreasonable demand from Sanders, every performance review, they would all tell a story. His fingers brushed against a post-it. Notes stuck to his monitor, a reminder of the security protocol he'd completed just last night. Another impossible task he'd somehow managed. Another piece of evidence. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself, low enough that only he could hear. Not by a long shot. The box wasn't heavy. but it felt weighted with purpose as he lifted it. Walking past the rows of desks, Jake held his head high. Through the glass walls of her office, he could see Sanders watching his exit, probably expecting him to leave with his spirit broken. At the elevator, Jake paused for a moment, taking one last look at the office where he'd poured his heart into every project. The anger and disappointment in his chest had crystallized into something harder, more determined. As he walked through the lobby and into the bright morning sunlight, Jake's mind was already clear. Sanders might have won this battle, but she had no idea what was coming. He reached for his phone. It was time to make some calls. Jake sat in his car in the parking lot, the box of belongings on the passenger seat beside him. Through the windshield, he watched employees entering the building for another workday, unaware that it could be their turn next. His mind drifted to the others who had left before him. Anita from testing, brilliant at her job but suddenly gone after weeks of Sanders' criticism. David from development, pushed out despite bringing in major projects. Each departure followed the same pattern: constant pressure, impossible demands, then termination. The morning traffic hummed around him as Jake pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Marcus Reed's name. His old college friend, now an investigative journalist, had always told Jake to call if he ever needed help. Jake's finger hovered over the call button. Speaking up meant risk. It meant possibly being blacklisted in Silicon Valley. But staying silent meant Sanders would continue targeting others, destroying more careers on her path to power. He thought of Mike's whispered warnings, Lisa's hidden support, the quiet conversations in the break room. How many others had faced the same discrimination but felt powerless to fight back? Jake pressed call. The phone rang twice before Marcus answered. Jake, this is unexpected. Everything okay? No, Marcus, it's not, Jake replied, his voice firm. I need your help. There's a story you need to hear. As he started his car, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The first step had been taken. Now there was no turning back. The coffee shop buzzed with morning activity as Jake sat across from Marcus Reed. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting warm patches on their table. Marcus's press badge hung loosely around his neck, a reminder of how their paths had diverged since college. Let me get this straight, Marcus said, leaning forward. Sanders gave you impossible deadlines, criticized everything you did, and then fired you for not fitting in. His voice carried a mix of concern and professional interest. Jake nodded, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. That's not even half of it. There were others before me. Anita from testing, David from development, all gone the same way. Marcus pulled out his notebook, his reporter's instincts kicking in. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. As Jake recounted the past few months, the late-night demands, the public humiliation, the isolation, Marcus's expression grew darker. He scribbled notes, occasionally looking up to ask pointed questions. This isn't just poor management, Jake, Marcus said finally, tapping his pen against the notebook. This is systematic discrimination. The pattern is too clear to ignore. I know, Jake replied softly. But what can I do? It's my word against hers, and she's got the whole system behind her. Marcus shook his head, a determined glint in his eyes. No, it's not just your word. Every person who left, every email she sent, every impossible deadline. It's all evidence. We just need to put it together. You think there's really a story here? There's more than a story. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. There's a chance to stop this from happening to someone else. Think about it. How many others might be going through the same thing right now? Jake thought about Mike's whispered warnings, Lisa's fearful glances, the quiet conversations in the break room. How many others had stayed silent out of fear? It won't be easy, Marcus continued. Sanders and the company will fight back hard. Are you ready for that? Jake met his friend's gaze, feeling a spark of determination ignite in his chest. What do we need to do first? We gather evidence, talk to former employees, build a case that's too strong to ignore. Marcus's voice carried the confidence of someone who had exposed corruption before. "But Jake, you need to be sure. Once we start this, there's no turning back." Jake thought of his last view of the office, Sanders watching his departure, his colleagues avoiding his eyes. The anger and humiliation of that moment crystallized into resolve. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "It's time someone stood up to her." Marcus nodded, reaching for his phone. "Then, let's get started. I know some people who can help." He paused, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Just remember, you're not alone in this fight anymore." Jake stared out the coffee shop window, watching people hurry past. His fingers tapped nervously on the table as Marcus laid out the potential risks. "I should warn you," Marcus said gently. "Going up against a company this big isn't easy. They have powerful lawyers' connections in the industry. They could make it hard for you to find another job in tech." Jake's throat tightened. "I hadn't thought about that. My career," he trailed off, imagining doors closing across Silicon Valley. "And Sanders probably has friends in high places," Marcus continued. "She might try to discredit you, spread rumors. Are you ready for that kind of fight?" The coffee in Jake's cup had grown cold. He thought about his savings, his rent payments, his family's expectations. Playing it safe meant walking away, finding another job, starting over. "I understand if you want to step back," Marcus said. "No one would blame you." Jake looked down at his phone where Mike's message still showed on the screen. "We all know it's not right." He remembered the fear in his colleagues' eyes, the whispered conversations about others who had left. "If I stay quiet," Jake said slowly, "Sanders wins. She'll keep doing this to others. More careers destroyed, more lives affected." His voice grew stronger with each word. Marcus leaned forward. "This isn't just about getting your job back, Jake. It's about exposing a system that allows people like Sanders to abuse their power. Someone needs to take the first step." Jake straightened in his chair, a new resolve settling over him. The fear was still there, but something else was stronger now: determination. "If we don't fight back," he said firmly, "nothing changes. I can't live with that." Marcus smiled, pulling out his notebook again. "Then let's do this right. We'll build a case they can't ignore." Looking at his friend's confident expression, Jake felt his doubts begin to fade. The path ahead would be difficult, but he wasn't walking it alone. The email arrived late that night while Jake was reviewing his old work documents. The sender's name was unfamiliar: Chloe Richards. As he clicked open the message, his eyes widened with each line. "I saw your post about Martha Sanders," the email began. "We need to talk. I have information that could help you." Jake sat up straighter in his chair. After Marcus had helped him share his story online, he'd hoped others might come forward, but he hadn't expected a response so quickly. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe away from the tech district. Chloe arrived early, a slim folder tucked under her arm. She was younger than Jake expected, with long brown hair and nervous eyes that kept scanning the room. "I worked there for 2 years, she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "In the development team until Sanders decided I was a problem employee." "What happened?" Jake asked gently, recognizing the pain in her voice. Chloe's hands trembled slightly as she opened her folder. "She used the same tactics on me. Impossible deadlines, constant criticism, isolated me from the team. Then one day, gone, just like you." She pulled out several documents, spreading them carefully on the table. "But I kept everything: emails, performance reviews, meeting notes. Look at this one." Jake leaned forward, reading an email chain between Sanders and Hare. His breath caught as he saw how she had systematically built a case against Chloe, twisting minor incidents into major infractions. "There's more," Chloe said, her voice stronger now. She's done this to at least 5 others that I know of. Always the same pattern, always the same pattern, always targeting people she sees as threats. Why didn't you come forward before? Jake asked. Chloe looked down at her untouched coffee. Fear. She made it clear what would happen if I spoke up. But seeing your story, she met his eyes. Maybe it's time we all stopped being afraid. Jake carefully gathered the documents, his mind racing with the possibilities. With Chloe's evidence and Marcus's help, they might finally have a chance to expose Sanders's true nature. Thank you, he said sincerely. This must have been hard for you. Chloe managed a small smile. Just promise me we'll make her answer for what she's done. Chloe's hands shook as she reached for another document. If Sanders finds out I'm helping you, she pulled back slightly, fear crossing her face. Listen, Jake leaned forward, keeping his voice gentle. I understand your fear. She made me feel the same way. But think about everyone still working there, living in fear every day. Marcus spread the documents across his living room table, arranging them chronologically. The evening light cast long shadows over pages of emails and meeting notes. Look at this pattern, he pointed to several emails. Every time someone questioned her decisions, they were suddenly labeled as difficult or not team players. Jake nodded, scanning another document. But there's something else here. These project budgets don't add up. Chloe moved closer, her earlier hesitation fading as she focused on the numbers. She always insisted on handling certain project allocations personally. Nobody questioned it because they were afraid, Jake finished. The 3 of them huddled over a particularly revealing email chain. These numbers, Marcus circled several figures with his pen. She's been manipulating project budgets, moving money around. But where's it going? They worked through the evening, connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Sanders wasn't just pushing people out. She was using her position for personal gain. This is bigger than workplace bullying, Marcus said, running a hand through his hair. She's been systematically removing anyone who might notice these financial discrepancies. Chloe's face paled. That's why she targeted the most detail-oriented employees. We were all getting too close to noticing. Jake placed a reassuring hand on Chloe's shoulder. That's exactly why we need to expose this. It's not just about saving careers anymore. It's about stopping corruption. Chloe took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. You're right. I've been scared for too long. What do you need from me? As they continued analyzing the documents, their determination grew stronger. Each new discovery confirmed what they had suspected. Sanders's abuse of power went far deeper than anyone had imagined. I still have contacts in the company, Chloe said quietly, checking her phone. People who want to help but are too scared to speak up openly. Jake and Marcus exchanged glances across the coffee table. The evening had turned into night, empty coffee cups scattered among their documents. We need more voices, Marcus said, tapping his pen thoughtfully. More evidence. Every person Sanders pushed out might have a piece of the puzzle we're missing. Jake pulled up his old work contacts. Anita from testing, David from development. They both left under similar circumstances. Maybe now they'd be willing to talk. I can reach out to them, Chloe offered, then hesitated. But please, keep my name out of it for now. I can't risk Sanders finding out I'm involved. Not yet. Jake nodded, understanding. We'll protect your identity. You've risked enough already. I can use my press contacts, Marcus added. Make some quiet inquiries without raising flags. People tend to open up to journalists if we promise anonymity. They spent the next hour making lists of potential contacts, former employees, team leads who had witnessed Sanders's behavior, even cleaning staff who might have overheard important conversations. It's like building a web, Chloe observed, looking at their growing list of names. Each person might know something different. And together, They tell the whole story, Jake finished. He looked at Chloe with gratitude. Thank you for being brave enough to start this. She managed a small smile. Just promise me we'll be careful. Sanders has eyes everywhere. As they packed up for the night, their plan was taking shape. They would need to move carefully, gathering evidence piece by piece, always staying one step ahead of Sanders' suspicion. Karen Miles sat stiffly in the corner booth of the diner, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of untouched coffee. Her professional appearance couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes as she glanced repeatedly at the door. I shouldn't be here, she said as Jake and Marcus settled into the seats across from her. If the company finds out I'm talking to you. Marcus placed his recorder on the table but didn't turn it on. Everything stays confidential until you say otherwise, Karen. We're just having a conversation. Jake leaned forward slightly. I know you worked in the development team for 3 years before Sanders arrived. What changed after she took over? Karen's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. At first, it was subtle. Extra meetings, constant revisions to my reports, always finding small faults. Just like with me, Jake said softly. And then the real pressure started. Karen's voice grew quieter. Impossible deadlines, public criticism being excluded from important meetings. She made me feel incompetent despite my track record. Marcus took notes quietly while Jake nodded encouragingly. Karen seemed to gather strength from their attention. But the worst part, she pulled out her phone, scrolling through old emails. She started copying Har on every minor issue, building a case against me. By the end, I was so stressed I could barely sleep. Did anyone speak up for you? Jake asked. Karen gave a bitter laugh. Everyone was too scared. Sanders made it clear what happened to troublemakers. She paused, looking between them. What exactly are you planning to do with all this? We're building a case, Marcus explained, gathering evidence of systematic discrimination and abuse of power. But we need people willing to tell their stories. Fear flickered across Karen's face. I can't. My current job, my reputation. Sanders has connections everywhere in the industry. I understand, Jake said gently. She made me feel the same way. But think about how many others will face the same treatment if no one speaks up. Karen stared into her cold coffee, conflict clear on her face. The diner's afternoon crowd buzzed around them, oblivious to the tension at their table. Can you really protect me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We won't use your name or any identifying details without your explicit permission, Marcus assured her. But your story could be the piece we need to stop this from happening to someone else. Karen took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. Okay, let me tell you everything, but please, be careful with this information. Sanders isn't someone who forgives people who cross her. Jake leaned across the diner table, his voice low but passionate. When Sanders fired me, I felt alone, powerless. But then others started coming forward. Chloe, now you. Each story shows a pattern we can't ignore. Karen's eyes widened as Jake described the impossible deadlines, the isolation, the carefully orchestrated pressure. Her hands gradually relaxed their grip on her coffee cup as she recognized her own experience in his words. The same thing happened to me, she said, pulling a folder from her bag. But there's something else you need to see. Her hands trembled slightly as she spread several documents on the table. These are the original project reports I submitted. And these, she pulled out another set, are what Sanders presented to management. Marcus leaned forward, comparing the papers side by side. His journalist's eyes narrowed as he spotted the discrepancies. She altered the performance metrics completely. She fabricated errors that never existed, Karen explained, pointing to specific sections. Changed success rates, modified client feedback. By the time she was done, my record looked terrible. Jake studied the documents, anger building in his chest. She did this systematically, didn't she? Created a paper trail to justify pushing you out? And not just me, Karen added, her voice stronger now. She did the same thing with the Maxwell project last year. Changed numbers, shifted blame, removed anyone who questioned her methods. Marcus was rapidly taking notes, connecting new dots. Look at these dates, he said suddenly. Every major project under Sanders shows the same pattern. Budget discrepancies, altered reports, key team members suddenly leaving. The project still succeeded, Karen said, but the credit always went to her, while others took the blame for any issues. Jake reached across the table, gently touching Karen's hand. Your evidence could help expose all of this. We can stop her from doing this to anyone else. Karen took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. You really think we can make a difference? Together? Jake smiled encouragingly. We already are. Each person who speaks up makes our case stronger. Marcus gathered the documents carefully, treating them like precious evidence. These reports aren't just about personal grievances anymore. They show systematic fraud and manipulation. That's something even the company can't ignore. Karen nodded slowly, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Then use them. Use everything I've told you. It's time someone stood up to her. Chloe burst into Marcus's apartment one evening, her laptop clutched tightly to her chest. Rain had plastered her hair to her face, but her eyes were bright with excitement and fear. You need to see this, she said, opening her laptop on the coffee table where Jake and Marcus were reviewing documents. I was going through old project files and found something. The email thread displayed on her screen made all three of them lean forward. It was a conversation between Sanders and Ethan Price, head of the company's largest subsidiary. Look at the dates, Chloe pointed at the screen. This was just before Jake's termination. They're discussing how to handle potential complications in the financial reports. Marcus read aloud, We need to ensure certain details don't come under scrutiny. The latest audit is getting too close. Perhaps it's time for some restructuring. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Restructuring. That's corporate speak for getting rid of people. There's more. Chloe scrolled down. Price and Sanders have been working together for months, moving funds between projects, adjusting reports. The numbers never add up. Marcus grabbed his notepad, sketching a quick diagram. Think about it. Sanders handles the main company's projects. Price runs the subsidiary. Perfect setup for hiding financial irregularities. And anyone who gets too close. Jake's voice trailed off as realization hit him. Gets pushed out, Chloe finished. Like you did. Like we all did. Marcus stood up, pacing the room. Jake, your termination wasn't about performance or cultural fit. You were getting too good at spotting inconsistencies in the project reports. A sacrificial lamb, Jake said bitterly. Remove the person who might expose everything. Make it look like a standard termination. Chloe pulled up more emails. Price and Sanders have been orchestrating this for at least a year. Every time someone starts asking questions about the numbers, they disappear, Marcus concluded. But they made a mistake this time. They didn't expect us to connect the dots. Jake looked at the evidence spread across the table. Emails, reports, testimonies. What had started as a case of workplace discrimination had evolved into something much bigger. We need to be careful how we handle this, Marcus warned. Price and Sanders aren't just bullies anymore. They're covering up serious financial fraud.
Jake stood by Marcus's apartment window, watching the city lights flicker in the evening rain. The stack of evidence on the table behind him told a story far bigger than his own unfair termination.
This isn't just about me anymore, he said, turning to face Marcus and Chloe. It's about an entire system that protects people like Sanders and Price while punishing anyone who speaks up. Marcus nodded, sorting through the documents. We need to be strategic about this. I suggest we start by releasing some of the basic evidence. The pattern of discrimination, the forced resignations. Get people talking. But not the financial stuff yet, Chloe asked, nervously twisting a strand of hair. Not yet, Marcus replied. That's our ace. Once we have public attention, we hit them with the fraud evidence. They won't see it coming. Jake moved back to the table. How do we protect ourselves? Sanders and Price won't just sit back and watch. We need to be careful, Marcus said, pulling out his laptop. First, we make copies of everything, store them in multiple secure locations. Then we start with a carefully worded article. No direct accusations, just questions that need answering.
Chloe's phone buzzed with a message. My contact in here says they're already nervous. People are whispering about internal investigations.
Good, Jake said. Let them worry, but we need to protect our sources. Karen, the others who've helped us.
Marcus started typing. I'll write the first piece, focusing on workplace culture and suspicious departures. Nothing that could trigger a lawsuit, but enough to make people ask questions.
And what about Sanders? Chloe asked. She'll know it's coming from us. Let her, Jake said firmly, but she won't know how much we really have. That's our advantage.
They worked late into the night, carefully planning each step. The evidence was organized, backed up, and secured. Their strategy was taking shape, a careful dance of revelation and protection.
Remember, Marcus said as they finished, once we start this, there's no going back. The company will fight dirty.
Jake looked at their work. Months of gathering evidence, building trust, connecting dots. We're ready, he said. It's time people knew the truth.
Marcus spread the latest batch of emails across his desk, his face illuminated by the computer screen. The documents painted a disturbing picture of corruption that went far beyond workplace bullying. Look at this, he pointed to a spreadsheet. Price created shell projects within the subsidiary. Fancy names, big budgets, but no actual deliverables. Jake leaned closer, scanning the numbers. These project codes don't match anything in the main company's records. Exactly, Marcus pulled up another document. The money goes in through legitimate projects, gets divided into these fake ones, then disappears. Price has been doing this for years. Chloe, who had been cross-referencing employee records, looked up, and every time someone in accounting or project management got too close, Sanders would step in, Jake finished. Create problems, build a case against them, force them out. Marcus clicked through more emails. She was Price's enforcer. He handled the money. She handled the people who might expose it. Here's the pattern, Chloe said, arranging several termination notices. Sarah from accounting asked questions about project budgets, gone within 2 months. Tom from audit started looking into discrepancies, forced to resign. Jake felt a chill as he recognized the tactics. She used the same playbook on all of us. Performance issues, cultural fit problems, impossible deadlines. But Price was the mastermind, Marcus said, pulling up an organizational chart. He built this whole system. The subsidiary was perfect cover, just enough separation from the main company to hide the money trail. They sat in silence, absorbing the scale of what they'd uncovered. It wasn't just workplace discrimination or financial mismanagement. It was systematic fraud, carefully orchestrated by Price and executed by Sanders. How much money are we talking about? Jake asked quietly. Marcus pointed to a final calculation on his screen. Millions, all hidden in plain sight through fake projects and forced departures. The evidence was undeniable now. Price and Sanders hadn't just been pushing people out. They'd been protecting a massive financial scheme, using workplace harassment as a tool to maintain their cover. The evening light faded as Jake, Marcus and Chloe huddled around a newly discovered email chain. The timestamp showed it was sent just days before Jake's termination. "We need to handle the development team situation," Price's email read. "Williams is asking too many questions about the project allocations." Sanders' reply was chilling. "Leave it to me. A public termination will send the right message to others. Focus attention on his performance issues while we move forward with the restructuring." Jake's hands clenched into fists. They planned it all. My firing wasn't random. It was a calculated distraction. "Look at this thread," Chloe scrolled down. "They have a whole list of problematic employees, people who've noticed irregularities in their departments." Marcus pulled up another document. "It gets worse. Price isn't just hiding money. These merger proposals, these acquisitions he's planning, he's positioning himself to take control of the entire company." "How?" Jake leaned forward. "By weakening key departments through targeted removals," Marcus explained. "Every person Sanders forces out is replaced by someone loyal to Price. He's building his power base." Chloe found another email marked confidential. "Here's their strategy. Continue restructuring under performance review cover. Replace key positions. Prepare for board takeover by Coor." "That's why they had to get rid of me," Jake said quietly. "I was getting close to their financial records, and they couldn't risk exposure before Price makes his move." The room fell silent as they absorbed the implications. This wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about a hostile takeover orchestrated through systematic harassment and manipulation. "We need to move faster," Marcus said urgently. "If Price takes control of the company, all evidence of their schemes could disappear forever." Marcus paced his living room, phone pressed to his ear. "Sarah, I need your help with this story. It's bigger than anything I've covered before." He paused, listening. "Yes, the evidence is solid. Financial fraud, systematic harassment, everything documented." Jake and Chloe watched anxiously as Marcus negotiated with his contact at the Daily Chronicle. The room was thick with tension. They knew getting a major newspaper involved would change everything. "She's interested," Marcus said after hanging up. "The Chronicle wants to run it as a front page expose." Chloe's laptop chimed with a new email notification. Her face lit up as she opened it. "My contact just sent more documents. Internal audits from Price's subsidiary. They show millions flowing through shell companies." "Perfect timing," Jake said, moving to look at her screen. "This proves everything we've been saying about their financial schemes." Suddenly, Chloe's phone buzzed. Her face paled as she read the message. "They know. Someone at the company just warned me. Price and Sanders are asking questions about recent document access." Marcus quickly gathered their evidence into secure folders. "We need to move fast, once they realize how much we have." His words were cut off by Jake's phone ringing. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Jake answered on speaker. "Mr. Williams," Sanders' cold voice filled the room. "I thought you should know that making false accusations against this company will have serious consequences for everyone involved." Jake met Marcus's eyes, keeping his voice steady. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Sanders?" "Consider it friendly advice. Your journalist friend might want to be careful about what stories he pursues. And Mrs. Richards should remember her non-disclosure agreement." The call ended abruptly. Chloe's hands trembled as she closed her laptop. How did they know I was involved? "They're scared," Marcus said firmly. "This threatening behavior proves it. We need to get the story to the Chronicle now before they can cover their tracks." Jake nodded, determination replacing fear. They think they can intimidate us into silence, but they've just given us one more piece of evidence to use against them. Marcus returned to his phone, dialing quickly. "Sarah, move up the timeline. We need to run the story tomorrow." "Yes, I'll send everything right now." The race was on. As they prepared to expose everything, they knew Price and Sanders wouldn't go down without a fight. But this time, the truth was on their side. A late-night security recording landed in Marcus's inbox, sent anonymously from inside the company. The grainy video showed Price and Sanders in the conference room after hours, their voices clear in the empty space. "We need to discredit Williams completely," Price said, pacing the room. "Plant evidence of data theft, spread rumors about professional misconduct." Sanders nodded, typing notes on her laptop. "I've already started compiling a fake trail. By the time we're done, no one will believe anything he says." Jake watched the video with Marcus, his jaw tightening at each word. "They're trying to destroy my reputation before we can expose them." "Then let's move first," Marcus said, pulling up the draft of his article. "We'll release the discrimination evidence, the pattern of terminations, the altered performance reviews. Hold back the financial proof for now." They worked through the night, crafting the initial story carefully. By morning, Marcus's article was live on the Chronicle's website. Silicon Valley's culture of fear, systematic discrimination at tech giant. The response was immediate. Social media exploded with comments from former employees sharing similar experiences. Industry forums lit up with discussions about workplace harassment. "It's working," Chloe said, monitoring the online reaction. "People are starting to ask questions about Sanders and the company's practices." Jake nodded grimly. "And when they try to smear me now, it'll look exactly like what it is: retaliation against a whistleblower." They had taken the first step. Now they waited to see how Price and Sanders would respond, knowing the real battle was just beginning. The Daily Chronicle's headline dominated the morning news cycle: "Toxic leadership and systematic discrimination." Inside Silicon Valley's latest scandal, Marcus's article, backed by testimonies and documents, painted a damning picture of life under Sanders' leadership. Jake's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as the story spread. Tech blogs picked it up, social media exploded with commentary, and former employees began sharing their own stories online. "The company just released a statement," Chloe said, reading from her laptop. "We take these allegations seriously but firmly deny any systematic discrimination. Our workplace policies follow industry best practices. Marcus scoffed. "A standard corporate response. But look at the comment section. Nobody's buying it." The company's stock price dipped as investors responded to the negative publicity. Industry forums filled with discussions about toxic workplace culture and abuse of power. Price just called an emergency board meeting, their inside source texted. He's furious about the article. In his private office, Ethan Price paced like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs," he hissed to his legal team. "Find something on Williams, anything we can use to discredit him." Back at Marcus's apartment, they monitored the growing storm. More former employees were reaching out, offering to share their stories. The public pressure was building. "We've hit a nerve," Marcus said, scrolling through responses. "But Price won't give up easily. He has too much to lose." Jake nodded grimly. "He'll try to paint me as a disgruntled ex-employee, make it look like I'm just seeking revenge." "Let him try," Chloe said firmly. "We have evidence he doesn't know about yet. The financial documents, the secret recordings." Their phones buzzed simultaneously. A mass email from company leadership attempting to reassure employees. But the carefully worded message only raised more questions. "They're scrambling," Marcus observed. "Each denial just makes people more suspicious." Meanwhile, in the shadows, Price was assembling his counterattack. Legal threats, planted stories, fake evidence. He would use every weapon to protect his empire. The battle lines were drawn. Public opinion was shifting, but the real fight was just beginning. The morning news cycle erupted with damaging headlines about Jake. Local tech blogs suddenly carried stories questioning his professional integrity, each article carefully crafted to paint him as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. Former engineer accused of data theft, one headline blazed. Sources reveal pattern of security violations, claimed another. Jake sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through the articles on his laptop. Each story cited anonymous company sources describing how he had supposedly accessed restricted databases before his termination. The accusations were precise enough to sound plausible, yet vague enough to be almost impossible to disprove. "They're trying to control the narrative," Marcus said over the phone. "Classic price tactic. Attack the whistleblower's credibility." While Jake dealt with the media assault, Chloe faced her own battle. The envelope arrived at her apartment that morning, bearing the letterhead of the company's prestigious law firm. Her hands trembled as she read the carefully worded threats. "Dear Ms. Richards, it has come to our attention that you may be in violation of your non-disclosure agreement." The letter went on to detail potential legal consequences, ending with a clear warning about significant financial penalties. Her phone rang. It was Jake. "They're trying to scare you," he said gently. "Make you question whether helping us is worth the risk." "I know," Chloe replied, her voice unsteady. "But Jake, they mentioned specific dates when I accessed company files. They've been tracking me." "That's exactly why we can't back down now," Jake insisted. "These threats prove how desperate they are." Through her apartment window, Chloe watched people going about their normal lives on the street below. The letter lay on her coffee table, its threats seeming to echo in the quiet room. After everything she'd sacrificed, after all the evidence they'd gathered, could she really stay silent now? "I won't let them intimidate me," she finally said, her voice stronger. "We have the truth on our side." Jake smiled on his end of the line. That's exactly what they're afraid of. As the pressure intensified, whispers of intimidation began to spread through the tech industry. Ethan Price and Martha Sanders were not the type to accept defeat quietly. Their first move targeted the allies who had begun supporting Jake's story. Lisa, Jake's former colleague, received a cryptic email from the company's legal department. The message, carefully worded but unmistakably threatening, suggested her current job might be at risk if she continued to support Jake's claims. Her hands trembled as she forwarded the email to Marcus. "They're trying to silence everyone," Marcus muttered, studying the document. Jake leaned over his shoulder, anger burning in his eyes. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. An anonymous phone call to Marcus's secure line revealed a potential insider willing to provide more information. The caller, a senior project manager who wished to remain unnamed, hinted at financial irregularities that went far deeper than they had initially suspected. "We need to move fast," the anonymous source whispered. "Price is preparing a major counterattack. He's already reaching out to board members trying to control the narrative." Jake, Marcus, and Chloe huddled in Marcus's apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and laptop screens. The evidence was mounting, but they knew timing was critical. "If we wait too long," Chloe said, her voice tight with tension, "they'll find a way to bury everything." Marcus nodded, his journalist's instinct kicking in. "We need to release everything we have, not just the discrimination, but the financial evidence. Everything." The anonymous source provided a critical piece of the puzzle, internal documents showing how Price had been manipulating project budgets for years. Shell companies, fake projects, money laundered through complex financial mechanisms. "This goes beyond workplace harassment," Jake said, spreading the documents across the table. "This is full-scale corporate fraud." Their phones buzzed simultaneously. Another colleague had been approached by the company's legal team, warned about potential consequences of speaking out. The intimidation was systematic, calculated. "They're trying to create fear," Marcus said, his voice calm but determined. "But we have something they don't expect." A plan began to take shape. They would release everything, every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence they had carefully collected. Not gradually, but all at once. A complete exposure that would leave Price and Sanders no room to maneuver. The next 48 hours would be crucial. As the team prepared their final strategy, the tension was palpable. Jake looked at Marcus and Chloe, seeing the same determination reflected in their eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Marcus smiled grimly. "Let's bring them down." Public opinion split like a fractured mirror. Online forums buzzed with conflicting narratives, some supporting Jake as a whistleblower, others questioning his motives. Anonymous comments ranged from praise to harsh criticism, each thread a battlefield of corporate loyalty and moral outrage. "They're trying to break me," Jake told Marcus one evening, scrolling through the endless comments. His voice was steady, but tension lined his shoulders. Marcus watched him carefully. "Are you holding up?" Jake's laugh was short and bitter. "I didn't start this to be popular. I started this to expose the truth." Chloe arrived later that night, her usual nervousness replaced by a quiet determination. "I want to go public," she announced, breaking the tense silence. "With my full name. My story." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "They'll come after you hard." She nodded, fingers tracing the edge of a document. "If we don't stand together, they win. Simple as that." The preparation was meticulous. Marcus drafted the article, weaving together testimonies, financial records, and personal accounts. Each paragraph was a carefully constructed weapon aimed at exposing the systematic corruption. Jake reviewed every line, ensuring accuracy. Chloe Cross checked documents, her background in tech giving her a sharp eye for details. "This isn't just about me anymore," Jake said quietly. "It's about everyone who's been silenced." As dawn broke, they made their final preparations. The article would go live simultaneously across multiple platforms, a coordinated strike designed to prevent any immediate corporate pushback. Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Ready?" Jake and Chloe exchanged a look. A silent understanding passed between them. No turning back. "Publish," Jake said. The financial documents spread across Marcus's desk looked like a roadmap of corporate deception. Chloe's fingers traced the lines of falsified reports, her breath catching at each discovered discrepancy. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of complex transactions. "Ethan created shell projects that don't exist. Millions. Just vanishing." Marcus leaned closer, his journalist's eye catching every detail. "It's worse than we thought. These aren't just accounting errors. This is systematic fraud." Jake's jaw tightened. "We can't wait. If we don't expose this now, he'll find a way to cover his tracks." They worked through the night, organizing evidence with surgical precision. Each document, each email, each financial record became a piece of an explosive puzzle. The stakes were higher than a single career. This was about exposing a systemic corruption that had destroyed countless professional lives. "We go live in 1 hour," Marcus announced, setting up the streaming equipment in his apartment. Jake stood before a simple backdrop, camera positioned carefully. His hands were steady, his voice calm. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. The live stream began. Jake spoke directly to the camera, his story unfolding with methodical clarity. He detailed the impossible deadlines, the systematic targeting, the financial manipulations. Behind him, a screen displayed documents, raw, unfiltered evidence. "This isn't about me," Jake said, his voice resonating with quiet determination. "This is about every person who's been silenced, pushed out, destroyed by a system that protects those in power." Within minutes, the stream went viral. Tech forums, social media platforms, news websites. Jake's testimony spread like wildfire. Millions watched, sharing, commenting, demanding accountability. Ethan Price, watching from his office, went pale. Martha Sanders felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The truth was no longer contained, and there was no going back. Ethan Price's legal team moved quickly, drafting a lawsuit against Jake within hours of the live stream. The documents were aggressive, attempting to paint Jake as a disgruntled ex-employee spreading malicious lies. But their strategy crumbled under the weight of evidence. Each claim was systematically dismantled by the mountain of documented proof Jake and Marcus had meticulously compiled. Financial records, email chains, internal memos, everything told a story too clear to be denied. An anonymous email arrived at Marcus's news desk, forwarded from an IP address within the company. The sender, identified only as internal witness, provided additional confirmation of the allegations. Detailed spreadsheets showed how project managers had been systematically silenced, how budget discrepancies had been deliberately hidden. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted with support for Jake. Tech industry forums buzzed with discussions about corporate accountability. Former employees began sharing their own stories, creating a tsunami of testimonials that validated every claim. "We demand transparency" became a rallying cry across digital platforms. Investors started pulling back. The company's stock price began a sharp descent. Board members held emergency meetings, realizing the reputational damage was escalating by the hour. Martha Sanders became the first casualty. The board, desperate to control the narrative, made a calculated decision. She was terminated immediately, her dismissal positioned as a swift response to the allegations. A terse press release announced her departure. In light of recent allegations, Martha Sanders has been relieved of her duties, effective immediately. But it was too little, too late. The public wanted more than a single sacrificial termination. They demanded systemic change, a complete cultural overhaul of how tech companies treated their employees. Jake watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of vindication and sadness. This wasn't about personal victory. It was about exposing a system that had broken too many careers, silenced too many voices. Marcus called, his voice excited. "They're talking about a full internal investigation. Congressional hearings are being discussed." Chloe, who had risked everything by going public, sent a message. "We did it. We actually did it." But Jake knew their fight was far from over. Removing one executive wouldn't dismantle the entire corrupt infrastructure. Real change would require sustained pressure, continuous exposure. The company's leadership was scrambling, issuing statements promising reforms, diversity training, transparent hiring practices. But Jake and his team would be watching closely. One battle was won. The war for corporate accountability was just beginning. The legal hammer fell swiftly on Ethan Price. Within weeks of Jake's revelations, federal investigators descended on the company's headquarters. Financial crimes units began meticulous examinations of every transaction, every hidden account. Price was immediately suspended, his access to company resources revoked. The once powerful executive found himself facing multiple investigations: financial fraud, corporate misconduct, systematic workplace discrimination. Each allegation carried potential criminal charges that could reshape his entire future. The company's board of directors launched a comprehensive internal review. Their public statement was carefully crafted but carried a tone of genuine contrition. "We are committed to total transparency," the press release declared. "A full restructuring will address the systemic issues that have compromised our corporate culture." Diversity and inclusion experts were brought in. Independent auditors began combing through years of employment records. Every promotion, every termination would be scrutinized with unprecedented thoroughness. Jake watched these developments with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. This wasn't just about his personal vindication. It was about creating real, lasting change. Labor rights organizations reached out, offering support. Jake became an unexpected symbol of corporate accountability. Speaking engagements, interviews, panel discussions, he found himself at the center of a growing movement. Your story isn't just about one company, a representative from a workplace fairness nonprofit told him. You've opened the door for countless others to speak up. Tech industry forums buzzed with energy. Companies began conducting internal reviews, worried they might be next. Whistleblower protection policies were strengthened. Reporting mechanisms were overhauled. Marcus tracked the ripple effects, documenting how Jake's stand was transforming corporate culture. This is bigger than we imagined, he told Jake during one of their strategy sessions. You've started a movement. Social media amplified the message. The hashtag #GetTechAccountability trended for weeks. Former employees from multiple companies began sharing their own experiences, emboldened by Jake's courage. Universities started incorporating workplace ethics courses. Tech conferences added panels about creating inclusive, transparent work environments. What had begun as one man's fight against injustice was becoming a nationwide conversation about corporate responsibility. Jake received hundreds of messages daily. Some were from people sharing similar experiences, others from companies seeking advice on cultural transformation. He realized his journey was no longer just personal. It had become a catalyst for systemic change. We're not just fixing a company, Jake told Chloe during one of their strategy meetings. We're reimagining how workplaces should function. The movement spread beyond tech. Manufacturing, finance, healthcare, industries across the board began examining their own cultures, inspired by Jake's unprecedented stand. As the year drew to a close, Jake reflected on the journey. The road had been difficult, filled with uncertainty and risk. But looking at the transformation happening around him, he knew every challenge had been worth it. One voice, raised with courage and conviction, could indeed change everything. When the company's board extended an invitation for Jake to return, his response was immediate and unequivocal. No, he said simply, his voice calm but firm. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. The board's offer came with impressive promises: a senior leadership position, a substantial compensation package, public acknowledgement of the previous wrongs. But Jake saw through the carefully constructed olive branch. This wasn't about genuine change. It was damage control.
I'm not interested in being their redemption story, Jake told Marcus during their weekly coffee meeting. Real change comes from outside the system, not from within. Chloe's journey took a different path. She was honored by several workplace equality organizations for her courage in coming forward. At a prestigious awards ceremony, she delivered a powerful speech about the importance of speaking truth to power. Silence protects those who abuse their position, she told the packed auditorium. Our voices are our most powerful tool. Marcus channeled their collective experience into a meticulously researched book. Broken Systems, a tech industry reckoning, became an unexpected bestseller, detailing not just their story, but the broader systemic issues in corporate. The book tour became a platform for continued dialogue. Jake and Chloe joined Marcus at various events, sharing insights, answering questions, inspiring others to challenge workplace injustices. Public pressure remained relentless. Social media campaigns, investor petitions, employee walkouts. The tech industry was being forced to examine its deepest cultural flaws. Companies began implementing more transparent hiring practices, establishing independent review boards, creating genuine whistleblower protection mechanisms. Jake watched these developments with a mix of satisfaction and cautious hope. This wasn't about personal victory, but about creating meaningful, sustainable change. We're not just fighting one company, he often said during speaking engagements. We're challenging an entire system that has protected the powerful for too long. The ripple effects continued to expand. Legislative discussions about corporate accountability gained momentum.
Universities began integrating workplace ethics more deeply into their business and technology curricula. Chloe started a nonprofit focused on supporting whistleblowers, providing legal resources and emotional support for those facing similar challenges. Marcus continued his investigative journalism, using their experience as a template for exposing systemic workplace issues. Jake, meanwhile, began exploring ways to create alternative workplace models. Consulting with organizational psychologists, he started developing frameworks for more humane, transparent corporate cultures. Their victory wasn't just about exposing one company's misconduct. It was about fundamentally reimagining how workplaces could and should function. As the year drew to a close, Jake reflected on their journey. The path had been difficult, filled with uncertainty and personal risk, but looking at the transformation happening around them, he knew every challenge had been worth it. One voice, raised with courage and conviction, could indeed change everything. Jake's phone became a constant symphony of messages. Hundreds of stories poured in, each a testament to shared experiences of workplace injustice. Engineers, designers, analysts, they all shared a common narrative of silent suffering. "You gave us a voice," one message read. Another simply said, "Thank you for being brave enough to speak." Inside the tech company, a new generation of employees began stirring. Young professionals who had witnessed the entire saga started organizing. Small discussion groups evolved into structured movements demanding comprehensive workplace reform. They created internal networks, sharing experiences, documenting potential systemic issues. Their demands went beyond typical corporate complaints. They wanted fundamental cultural transformation. "We won't be silenced anymore" became their unofficial motto. The ripple effect spread quickly through Silicon Valley. Companies that once operated with unchecked power began conducting internal audits. Leadership teams assembled task forces focused on workplace culture, diversity, and employee protection. Investor presentations now included slides about corporate ethics. Board meetings dedicated time to discussing workplace environment, not just financial performance. Jake watched these developments with a mixture of satisfaction and reflection. This wasn't just about his personal vindication. Something much larger was happening. During a speaking engagement at a tech conference, he shared his perspective. "This isn't about one company or one person," he told the audience. "This is about reimagining how we treat human beings in professional spaces." The crowd's response was electric. Standing ovation, tears, passionate conversations. Marcus tracked the broader impact, documenting how their stand was transforming corporate landscapes. "You've started something bigger than ourselves," he told Jake during one of their strategy sessions. Chloe's nonprofit began receiving funding from tech companies wanting to demonstrate their commitment to change. Speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, collaborative workshops, the momentum was undeniable. Jake realized their fight had become a movement, not just about exposing wrongdoing, but about creating a new paradigm of workplace culture. One voice, raised with courage, had indeed changed everything. Jake knew the next chapter of his journey would be challenging. Transparency Tech, his startup, wasn't just a company. It was a mission. Initial funding meetings were brutal. Investors whispered about Ethan's smear campaign, casting shadows on Jake's reputation. Every pitch deck felt like walking through a minefield of skepticism. "They're scared," Marcus told him during a late-night strategy session, "but we'll break through." Chloe helped redesign their approach. She crafted pitch presentations that weren't just about technology, but about cultural revolution. Each slide told a story of systemic change, of creating workplaces where talent truly mattered. Their first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A small venture capital firm, run by a woman who had faced her own workplace battles, saw beyond the rumors. She understood what Jake was building. "This isn't just a startup," she told Jake. "This is a statement." The initial investment was modest but meaningful. Each dollar felt like validation. Jake assembled a team of professionals who believed in the mission. Diverse, talented individuals committed to challenging the status quo. Their first product was a workplace transparency platform. software that could anonymously track workplace dynamics, identifying potential systemic issues before they became toxic. "We're not just building technology," Jake would tell potential partners. "We're building a movement." Slowly, carefully, transparency tech began to gain momentum. Each successful project, each satisfied client, chipped away at the lingering doubts. Jake looked at his team and smiled. Their journey was just beginning. Transparency Tech's breakthrough came with their first major product, a revolutionary workplace analytics platform that did more than just track performance. It measured workplace health, emotional intelligence, and team dynamics in real time. Jake designed the system around a simple principle: transparency breeds trust. Their software could identify potential toxic behaviors before they became systemic problems. Managers received nuanced insights about team interactions, communication patterns, and potential areas of stress. "We're not just collecting data," Jake would tell potential clients. "We're creating tools for human-centered leadership." The company's internal culture reflected its mission. Weekly team meetings became collaborative sessions where every voice mattered. Failure wasn't punished. It was studied, learned from, celebrated as a step toward innovation. Young tech professionals began seeing Transparency Tech as more than a company. It was a movement, a different way of imagining workplace culture. Their recruitment process was unique. Candidates were evaluated not just on technical skills, but on their commitment to creating positive work environments. Jake assembled a team that was diverse, passionate, and committed to challenging existing paradigms. Within 18 months, tech industry publications were writing about the company's unique approach. A new model of leadership, one headline proclaimed. Another called Jake the architect of workplace revolution. Investors who had initially been skeptical now competed to be part of their funding rounds. The company's valuation grew, but Jake remained focused on the core mission, transforming workplace culture. "This isn't about money," he would tell his team. "This is about creating environments where people can truly thrive." As word spread, more companies began adopting their platform. Each implementation became a case study in positive organizational transformation. Jake looked around his open, bright office. This was more than a company. This was the beginning of real change. The conference hall fell silent as Jake stepped onto the stage. Thousands of tech industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and young professionals waited, their collective breath suspended in anticipation. 5 years ago, I was just another engineer being pushed out of a system that valued power over people, Jake began, his voice steady and clear. The massive screens behind him displayed moments from his journey. The challenging days, the legal battles, the eventual triumph. He spoke not with bitterness, but with a quiet determination that resonated through the room. Each word painted a picture of systemic change, of choosing courage over silence. The audience leaned forward, captivated. "This isn't about me," Jake said. "This is about every person who's ever felt voiceless in their workplace." He shared stories of Transparency Tech's journey, how they'd built a company that treated people as human beings, not just resources. How innovation flourished when fear was replaced with trust. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. Standing ovation, tears, inspiration. Industry publications would later call it the speech that redefined corporate culture. But for Jake, it was simply telling the truth. The ripple effect spread quickly through Silicon Valley and beyond. Tech giants that once seemed impenetrable began studying Transparency Tech's model. Corporate boardrooms buzzed with discussions about workplace culture, employee well-being, and transparent leadership. Google redesigned its performance review systems. Microsoft launched comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiatives. Smaller startups across the country began adopting Jake's principles of open communication and psychological safety. "It's not just about technology anymore," one industry report noted. "It's about creating human-centered workplaces." Jake watched these changes with a mixture of satisfaction and humble reflection. What had begun as a personal fight against injustice had transformed into a national conversation about corporate responsibility. During an interview with a major tech publication, he simplified his philosophy. People are more important than profits. Always. Universities started incorporating his approach into business and technology curricula. Leadership programs analyzed transparency tech as a case study of ethical entrepreneurship. Young professionals began demanding more from their employers, inspired by Jake's stand. One evening, standing by the window of his office, Jake looked out over the city skyline. The twinkling lights seemed to pulse with possibility. This wasn't just his story anymore. This was the beginning of a broader societal shift. Marcus called, interrupting his thoughts. "You realize what you've started, right?" Jake smiled. "We're just getting started." The city stretched before him, a landscape of potential, of hope, of change. His journey had been about more than personal vindication. It had been about reimagining what was possible. One voice, one stand, an entire system transformed. Jake's story isn't just about one man fighting a broken system. It's a blueprint for creating real change. If this story inspired you, if you've ever felt silenced in your workplace, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below. Have you experienced workplace discrimination? What would you do in Jake's situation? And don't forget to share this video, because change starts with one voice, your voice. Together, we can transform workplace culture, one story at a time.